When massive, multi-billion-dollar business strategies inevitably collide with strict federal regulation, the impact ripples through the entire economy. On December 10, 2024, the Federal Trade Commission stepped in and successfully halted a proposed mega-merger between grocery giants Kroger and Albertsons. Kroger's motivation for the deal was straightforward. They wanted to combine operations to achieve massive scale, necessary to compete with non-traditional retail titans like Amazon and Walmart. Regulators, however, argued the merger would consolidate too much market power into a single entity, which would inevitably force food prices up in an already inflated market. This diagram outlines the central conflict. This regulatory battle pits the drive for supply chain efficiency against the danger of unchecked pricing power. To determine who was right, we must perform an economic stress test, examining Kroger's market structure, price elasticity, and cost mechanics. Multi-billion-dollar business strategies aren't decided by executive whim. They are strictly governed by invisible microeconomic forces that regulators use as a literal rulebook. Every business operates within a specific market structure, existing on a spectrum that ranges from perfect competition with endless competitors to absolute monopolies controlled by a single entity. This matrix shows exactly where Kroger sits on that spectrum. They operate within what economists call an oligopoly. An oligopoly is defined by two key features. The market is dominated by a scarce few massive entities, and there are significant barriers preventing new competitors from entering the space. But despite their massive size and dominance, players in an oligopoly do not have the absolute control over market prices that a pure monopoly enjoys. This playbook outlines the pricing strategies available. They range from highly illegal collusion, where dominant players secretly fix prices, to rigorous competitive pricing. Because of legal and market restrictions, Kroger relies on active, dynamic pricing based strictly on market demand to maximize profits. Operating in an oligopoly forces a corporation to live in a constant state of hyper-responsive warfare. One wrong pricing move can be immediately exploited by the few remaining giant rivals. Those pricing moves are restricted by consumer behavior, specifically a concept known as price elasticity. This slider illustrates elasticity, which measures how highly responsive consumer demand is to fluctuations in a product's market price. For grocery chains, products are highly elastic. This happens because the market has a high availability of substitute providers. If Kroger raises the price of milk even slightly, consumers can simply drive across the street to a competitor. When they do, Kroger's demand drops immediately. This infographic details how Kroger attempts to fight that elasticity by building competitive moats through product specialization. They offer unique value by relying heavily on their own private label brands and by becoming exceptionally adept at streamlining the organic food supply chain. Even with those moats, Kroger is essentially trapped. They cannot simply raise prices to generate more profit across the board, which means they must find another way to improve their margins internally. Because pricing is constrained by elasticity, survival in the retail industry depends entirely on managing the internal anatomy of production costs. This table breaks down those expenses. A store has fixed costs, like real estate and overhead, which never change regardless of sales volume. They also have variable costs, like inventory and logistics, which fluctuate constantly with output. To understand profitability, economists combine these into the average total cost. This metric represents the total financial burden a company must cover per item sold to stay viable. This gauge illustrates the operational thresholds for a business. The ideal state is the green zone, where the market price comfortably exceeds the average total cost, generating pure profit. Below that is the dangerous yellow zone, or break-even point. If a store's price drops below the average total cost but stays above their variable costs, they operate at a loss but can still cover the basic logistics of selling. The fatal red zone is the shutdown point. If market prices fall beneath the average variable cost, the business cannot even afford to turn the lights on and must temporarily shut its doors. This chart graphs those exact zones in traditional microeconomic terms, highlighting the core intersections where the break-even and shutdown points dictate a firm's survival. Kroger's entire corporate strategy is a constant, desperate battle to pull their average total cost curve downward, keeping them safely out of the yellow and red zones. With these cost mechanics in mind, the true logic behind the Kroger-Albertsons merger comes into focus. This graph illustrates Kroger's internal math. Merging with Albertsons would create massive economies of scale, drastically shrinking their logistics and overhead costs, represented by this downward shift. From an internal survival standpoint, Kroger's strategy was mathematically flawless. Lowering their average cost guaranteed they would remain comfortably in the green zone. The FTC's concern rested on the market environment. Absorbing a primary rival shifts the structural makeup of the industry, moving the balance of power far beyond Kroger's internal balance sheet. We must think back to the elasticity constraint. If Albertsons disappears as an alternative option, the availability of substitutes for the consumer drops drastically. This split screen shows the cause and effect equation. Reducing substitute availability directly shifts consumer demand from highly elastic to highly inelastic. Inelastic demand is incredibly dangerous in an oligopoly. If consumers have nowhere else to go for their groceries, the megacorporation is no longer restrained by competitive pricing. This diagram outlines the FTC's final logic. The merger was halted because the resulting inelasticity would hand Kroger unchecked pricing power over essential food supplies. The law stepped in to protect the consumer, and the federal government definitively locked the door on the proposed megamerger. This injunction demonstrates that concepts like elasticity and cost curves are the practical metrics used to determine the legal boundaries of corporate growth.